the first set of questions really are focused more on what makes a good executive and fit and context. And if you don't mind, I'd like to maybe slightly shift gears and talk some about the risk of the wrong executive fit for portfolio companies. So what does that look like? What are some of the risks that a portfolio company can face when the wrong executive is in place? And how can these risks impact the success of the business, the transition? And, obviously, most mergers and acquisitions, especially post-close, can be a highly disruptive time and certainly a very transformational time typically within the organization. But what are the risks to that challenge to begin with if the portfolio company doesn't have the right executive in place?
So you've got two challenges. You've got the wrong executive, and then you've also got no executive. I'd argue that no executive is better than the wrong one, but at least you're going somewhere if you've got it. I think it's probably an easy one for everyone listening here that's a private equity investor to think, we definitely know what that feels like, and we definitely know what the outcomes of the challenges is. It purely comes down to realistically, your outcome for your goals are either not going to happen, and you can probably tell me, for those listening, your LPs are not going to be very happy about that. And then secondly, it's just going to be longer. So you're either not achieving what you set out to do, which is a business of 100 million from 20 and an EBITDA of 40 million, which gives you the IRR of 2.5 and whatever it is you're going for. You're either going to miss or you're going to extend your process, which, okay, fine. Venture's fine with that 1 in 10 type approach, but that's not really fair and not really accommodated in private equity. So that can be the real, what we call the headline type issue. But you then break into things a little bit smaller and you begin to lose the good people in the business. You begin to lose the people that may have actually been the people that could have helped turn things around with no executive. And nobody likes to be in a bad environment. Nobody likes to be in a business that's set to achieve something and isn't going there. So, and you then look at the private equity firm and raising capital. We're in a very difficult market right now from a capital raise perspective. And the only thing you can look at is how well has your firm performed. And if you're struggling to raise capital, and the answer to that question is probably you haven't performed as well. You might have smashed it out of the park, but you struggle in relationships. That could be the case, but it's likely that your performance hasn't done as well. And then you've only got to look at, have we hired the right executives to bring it in, and have we invested in the right companies? Now, providing you've done the right of the latter and the right businesses there, it's the executives to bring in to drive that business to the right outcome. And there's such a follow-on and a problem that curtails from this, that just getting the right people in the right seats, and whether that be in the portfolio company or the private equity firm, we can all think, if we all imagine now the person that you've got that you're just like, God, if I could just twin him, if I could just clone that person, I can have 3 of Johns, 3 of Janes, and just run them across the portfolio companies, and they'd be smashing it. 3 people in the associate level that would just kill it. And we're all like, yes. And we know the value that they bring and what comes in there. Now, the caveat to that is the danger of, which I talk about fairly bit internally here, which is what we really try and avoid, is the average performer. Low performers and underperformers get culled. Okay. The problem is the average performer tends to sit in the business and remain because they're not enough of a problem that you want them out, but they're not high performers, which are driving the business in the right way, but neither are they causing you a huge amount of problems. And that at the C-suite level is a really, really, real big issue, because that will extenuate your process more than having a bad performer in, because they tend to go immediately. Whereas your average performers, which we talk about the wrong executives in place, will just quell the business. And I've seen multiple private equity firms have issues with that. And, especially lower middle market, especially if it's deal by deal, especially if not a huge amount of pressure to exit immediately in fund cycles, then just holding on to those executives for far too long. And then deals go by the wayside. You get a 1 return, you get an even worse return on your capital. You sell it back to the founder. Dealing with a private equity firm that's just approached us about a search, and they've just had to hand the keys back to the founder and try and sell him it back because it's not worked out type process. So, everyone's heard of the nightmare outcomes and the nightmare scenarios, but, we've just got to protect private equity investors' careers and make sure that they're continuing to make good decisions on the portfolio side, which is what they've done private equity firms do so well with their due diligence process, and then the good executives into those businesses drive them to exit so they can continue to raise capital. And people like me and people like you, Jack, can continue to supply the industry and support these businesses and support its growth. So it's absolutely damn critical.
Yeah, and it's so it's really not the organizational capital in terms of the time, money, and effort for both the portco and the private equity firm. As you'd mentioned, the risk is that it can have a major impact on raising capital, on operational and financial performance, and there's plenty of research that shows effective leadership. In culture, which I do want to ask you some questions, in regards to culture, but there's no doubt that effective leadership and the right person that creates the right organizational culture has a significant impact on operational and financial performance. So, the risk is of not getting the right leadership in place is substantial. So, do you mind? Can you share any examples of situations where you've seen the wrong executive fit have a negative impact on a portfolio company? And what did you do to address the situation? So, you shared, what is the right fit? What's a good leader look like? What the risk is? But can we maybe just drill a little bit deeper? And do you have a tangible example that you can share?
Unfortunately, I've got a lot. So we've done a number of replacements in businesses, and we've seen a number of issues. I've seen executives in there for far too long, and usually it's the case. If you start thinking if you need to exit somebody, they're not right, and then you're waiting 6 months, year, 3 months, then you've already made your decision. When you start discussing that at the boardroom table when they're not there, or discussing that with one of your partners at a private equity firm, one of your colleagues there. So, I've got multiple examples, unfortunately. One of which was, I won't mention any names because the private equity firms won't thank me.
Oh, absolutely.
But
Right.
the portfolio company of a organization based in the US, chief executive had taken on the onus or valiant choice of deciding to sue one of their suppliers and spent an absolute fortune and decided to defend himself without a lawyer. So saved a little bit of money there, and then ended up losing and had to pay all the legal costs defending a mistake that he made in the business. So, it was an e-commerce business, and they made a fundamental error on spend, and he decided to sue them, and then it took the business into liquidation. The private equity firm managed to save it, and we got a chief executive in there who then took that through to a liquidity event. Another business where it was a organization, again up in the west coast of the US, northwest coast, and it was an organization which really bad culture, really bad built out executive team, which fundamentally stemmed from a chief executive who'd been there for, I think, 9 years, and again was taking that business down the wrong way, wasn't modernizing the business, wasn't taking it into new, utilizing technology. Everything ran old school. The investors and obviously the debt holders, with it being an LBO transaction, were starting to put significant pressure on because people wanted to exit. It had been an incredibly long time. And again, when the chief exec actually that we introduced into the business, who exited that business in a year and a half, which was 3 years ahead of what they thought they would get, a level of exit on, and got a very good multiple and very good IRR return on that of MOIC. So, the issue was that when you actually end up looking under the layers of what was happening in that business, there was just so many fundamental problems. There was so many executives and so many managers and so many people in the business that had been hired to hide the issues and hide the problems, and the relationship with the private equity firm had broken down. And, the board conversations were just the same discussion over and over again. And there's so many examples of things like this that I can communicate of, lack of execution from executives tends to be the main thing. I've done replacements of, unfortunately, racism and bullying chief executives who it all comes down to. When you see elements of this, the executive is out of their comfort zone. The executive is out of their knowledge and capability. They may be able to return that. And I'm not saying, just because people can't do what they need to do doesn't mean that they can't do it in the future. But we're not in a business of holding onto a company for 30 years and growing it from 5 to 10 million and thinking that's an achievement. This is 5-year turnarounds. This is 3-year turnarounds, 7-year turnarounds. And therefore, the executive has to know what they're doing. And if you're seeing that in the portfolio companies, I'm afraid it's because most likely 9 times out of 10, the executive that you have in that business is just not right. The executive you have in that business is out of their depth, and they will create every reason around it to try and put it onto someone else, to hire an executive, to bring someone else in, to, and the good people will exit fast and they will go to somewhere better, they will go to somewhere nicer, and your rubbish people will stay because that environment suits them and they can hide and they can be protected and they can remain in a business that isn't doing well and can blame the market. They can blame whoever. They can blame the person who used to work there. They blame the good person for leaving them, whatever around there. So far too many examples of that. And it's easy to talk about these scenarios, and I'm sure everyone's got their war stories, but all I'd say is just being able to identify that earlier, being able to identify that mistake quicker, and then being able to learn from that and bring the right executive in by using the steps that we've discussed earlier, and information will share later.
Well, great examples, Alex. Thank you. I mean, risk can't be any more severe or realized than that. Those are some pretty serious consequences of poor leadership. And, there's a lot of research on organizational culture and leadership and discussions around what's the rhyme and reason, what are the patterns of effective leadership, which I find to be just a fascinating topic. And conversations around such ideas as, transformational leadership, transactional leadership, servant leadership, and so on. And it sounds to me like you dig deep into two fronts, right? One is you make sure you understand the individual, what success did they have and why did they have it precisely? And, so you dig into that experience and you dig into those skills and traits as much as you possibly can to really understand the individual. But then you dig deep into the specific requirements of that portfolio company. So you don't just assume because success happens somewhere else that it's going to happen for this particular portfolio company. It sounds like you, through the mechanism and in the tools and the methods that you've described so far, you try to make sure that those two are as aligned as much as possible. Is that a fair summary?
That's absolutely the case. And what's on top of that, if you're thinking about how on earth do we identify if we're making these mistakes and we're not getting the right executives in and we've got a 1 in 2 hit rate of hiring and them being right, ask yourself this question. Once you've identified the outcomes of what you want to do, which most private equity investors are absolutely tremendous at because they've done the due diligence and they know where they want to take the business, what are the challenges that the executives will face coming into this organization? And if your recruiters aren't asking that questions, ask them to ask you it and give them that information. They're going to face this, they're going to face that, they're going to face this. This will be difficult. That'll be hard. This will be a real challenge for the business. This will work. This doesn't happen. We're not happy with the firm's culture. We're not happy with this, and this. And that then we'll be able to build the picture because then you can get the experience side right at the very minimum to then know exactly what you're looking for. And then that takes us into the kind of cultural aspect of what.